Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the Etymotic ER4XR. And I apologize to the company. I will butcher your name a few times, and I will try to avoid saying it, but I believe it's Etymotic, a little accent on the O. I apologize if that is wrong, but anyway. So this is what the ER4XR looks like. For those of you who aren't too familiar with it, this is the XR version, extended range. It's got a little more bass to it. There is the XS is the reference, which just has a little bit less bass. These are memory foam tips, and we'll talk about that in a second. Cable is detachable. Doesn't look like it, but it actually is, and it's a slight variation on MMCX. There's a little key slot. If we can see it down there, you can almost see it. So it's kind of a slight variation on MMCX, and some MMCX cables work, some do not. But the point is, it actually is detachable. So I'm not going to go over a ton of things that are in the box because there's a ton of stuff in the box, and this unit's been around a while. There's plenty of other people who've talked about everything that's in the box, but do be aware that it's a deep insert IEM. It's got a ton of different tips to make sure that you get the right fit no matter what style of ear you have, whether it turns up, down, left, right. It's got a lot of tips to suit a lot of different ears because it's really meant to be inserted quite deep into your ear. So this is the box. As I said, this is the extended bass response version. It's just got a little bump on the bass section, which works for me. People who aren't a fan of bass, you probably want to stick with the SR, the standard version. So I mentioned this a couple, days ago, maybe last week. It's been on sale on Autorama for a while for $129. It's usually $299. It's actually a spectacular price for this unit. It's a very high-end unit. Up until they will have a hybrid coming up, I think in April. But as of now, this is kind of one of those flagships for them. And $129 is a pretty amazing price for what it is. So let's sort of jump into it because there's a lot to cover. So if you read the marketing material, they say the ER4XR is uncompromising accuracy in the mid-range and high frequencies, but for those who appreciate a bit of extra presence in the lower end. And their name, Etymotic, means true to the ear. So this one is really all about accuracy, accuracy of reproduction, accuracy of frequency response. It is all about presenting as true to, the original source material as possible. And if you look at their company history, IEMs were sort of an offshoot of they're originally a research firm doing lots of hearing aid research as well. So they're not quite your typical IEM company. They're more of a research company who happen to have a consumer product. So keep that in mind. And I named this one Intermezzo. For those of you who are familiar with food, it's this middle course where you cleanse your palate in between maybe an appetizer and your main course. And it resets your brain and your taste buds and your palate back to a neutral position. And that's essentially why I bought the ER4XR. And lots of other tuners and reviewers sort of say the same thing. It's a way to reset your brain, to reset your ears. Especially for me, I listen to a ton of V-shape, bassy sets. It's nice to go back to something almost neutral, a very natural, uncolored sound. That's what the ER4XR. So be very careful when you're considering purchasing this one. It's very much a purpose purchase. You don't buy it because it's going to be, great on Spotify on your way to work. It will do that, but most people who pick it up are looking for something specific, either the accuracy or the speed of a single BA or the bass of a BA. It's not a spontaneous, it's a great price, I'm just going to pick it up. I think a lot of people, especially reviewers, pick it up because of that accuracy because they need some middle ground, a reference point to understand how far this set is from natural or too V-shaped, too much bass, not enough treble. It's a nice reference. So do consider that when you're considering this model. So like I said, it's a deep, someone described this as invasive fit, and I will go along with that. So the foamies, these are actually the less invasive, and what you really do, you scrunch this up if you're not familiar with memory foam tips. Scrunch this up, roll it around in your fingers for a little bit, and it becomes a nice tight tip, and then insert it into your ear, and it will slowly expand back into shape, and that fills your ear canal, and you get a very nice isolated fit. And at the same time, on this one, you'll actually feel it. It'll actually hit the, I'm not sure what the part of your ear it hits, but it butts right up against your part of your ear, and then you're sort of in the right ballpark. And I pull my ear up a little bit, and it gets just a little bit deeper in, but do scrunch it up and stick it in. And thank you to Brian Becker, who set me straight on the foamies over the triple flange, which I was using, which are also fine as well. They're just a little more invasive. So the general question, lots of people who watch my channel pick up blonde BL03s. Why would you pick this one up over the blonde BL03, or why is it different? And mostly because people complain about the BL03 for a couple specific reasons. It's got too much bass, it's a bit slow, the driver's a bit slow, it lacks clarity and resolution, it's not hi-fi because of those reasons. And I'm not sure I agree with that, but I've seen that thrown around that the BL03 just can't be high fidelity because it's missing all these little components. So possibly true, possibly not, depends on what your opinion is. But you can't deny that the BL03 is it sounds great. And as far as realism and accuracy of instruments, I think my personal opinion is it does vocals quite well, especially if you like a nice thick vocal, a very rich vocal, it does that really well. Whether you call that, too thick, the note weight's too heavy, that's your opinion, but I think it does those pretty well. So on the other side of that, you've got the ER4XR, which is a single BA, and it's really all about BA sound, so speed and details and resolution and accuracy because it's an Etymotic, and there's a real dynamic range to vocals as well, and all of that sort of builds up into realism. You get this in the room sense with this one. It's about as close to being in the recording booth as you're probably going to get it, $129. So I think BL03 probably works across a lot of people's preferences for just a fun sound you want to throw in your ears and listen to. It's great. The ER4XR is very much for people who are looking for things that the BL03 didn't do. More speed, more details, more resolution, not nearly as much bass. That accuracy and that dynamic range are what you find in the ER4X4. So, that's very much a purchasing decision. Which one of those two are you looking for is how you decide between the two. Not so much one is insanely better than the other one. They're just two different styles. And just kind of a slight reference. So Rebecca Pigeons, this is the Chesky recording from his demonstration discs, Spanish Harlem. You'll see Spanish Harlem mentioned a ton of times. But if you listen to the description of that song, and you listen to the song on this pair, he calls it palpable real. And that's what this one is really designed to do. It's this, as close as you can get to being in the studio when she recorded that. Her voice is palpably real. And if you listen to that, he also talks about the shaker. And he talks about, each shake of that shaker should sound unique. And the less unique it sounds, sort of the less resolution you have. And it's one of those concepts that I go back to over and over again. You'll hear shakers in that song. I play Sympathy for the Devil by Rolling Stones a lot. There's a shaker there. It's just a high frequency, slightly hard to reproduce sound with a lot of resolution that you don't necessarily find in budget sets, but just a point of interest there on that one. So is the ER4XR all technical? Is it boring? Is it fun? And For me, it's almost the biggest surprise of the whole set was it is very engaging, and it's quite fun to listen to. And I wasn't expecting that at all. I actually assumed it was going to be quite flat, not as engaging. It was just going to be a technical showcase, and it's really not. It's shocking, to me how much fun it actually is, and maybe it's because of the slight bump in the bass. It just hits a satisfying bass level for me, and it just sounds like lots of other IEMs with just a ton more detail and resolution. But it doesn't come across as non-engaging or flat or boring at all. So, quite shocked about that. So what does it sound like? It's almost this transparent and very revealing, very detailed. And for me, I kind of fell back on Etymotic's background, this hearing aid development and research into reproducing voices. It's extremely difficult for me to listen to anything but really detailed vocals, slower acoustic vocals. It's just amazing to listen to on ER4X4, and I don't have I actually do have a whole playlist full of those, but I realize that people don't listen to those over and over again every day, but it's hard not to listen to vocals on this because they're so good. But on the other side, fast guitars, because you've got a BA with a lot of speed and a lot of detail, fast guitars also sound really good. So I was sort of bouncing between acoustic, covers and kind of older heavy metal. It's bizarre, I realize that, but true. So let's get into some of the components of the bass. It's still BA bass, and it's got a higher level than a normal reference. So there's a lot of presence. The level is actually quite good. It's satisfying to me. It's not bloated at all. It goes quite deep. If you listen to the extension and pull out your sine wave generator and start it at 20 hertz, you're down there, perhaps not at 20, but between 20 and 30. It's kind of in that ballpark. You'll hear it definitely pulse down there. So it definitely goes deep. Nice extension. It actually slams pretty hard. For those of you like your bass to hit hard, for a BA, I think it hits quite hard, and it sounds really good because it's fast and it's accurate, which is another combination that you're not going to find in a budget BA. But there's little to no bleed. It's very detached from the mids, which is something that when you talk about high fidelity, that's another one of those things that people talk to about the BL03. There really wasn't enough separation, too much bleed. So the bass itself, this BA bass, it's surprising how it sounds great across a wide range of genres. And I'm an EDM fan. I listen to quite a bit. And because it hits so hard, it actually sounds quite good on EDM. So, here's an example. Ferry Corsten's Punk, the Artie Rock and Roller radio edit. It's a pretty hard-hitting song. And it sounds... I don't know if I've ever done an all BA, whether it's a multi-driver BA. I talk about that song mainly on dynamic drivers that hit really hard, like the ZSTX or even the Urban Fun. It's that kind of song. It hits your ear quite hard. But jump to 54 seconds. There's a really nice EDM drop there. Another good one, Sam Smith's Money on My Mind. So his voice, and a lot of his recordings, there's a real clarity to his voice, and that just comes through, again, on this ER4XR, which is really designed for that transparent, revealing, very clear vocals. And that's just one of those recordings of his that I really, really like. And plus, there's nice bass and drums going on. So that snare drum, just that bass line going in the background. And one is going quite deep, and one is hitting really hard on the upper end. And it's just a really nice balance of what it should sound like without any bloat, without any, weird harshness to it. So really nice there. So the mids is sort of where it's at on this one. Like they said, it's very much set in the mid-range frequencies for accuracy. So they're very clear, very transparent, very real. It's going to give you this sense of being in the room. There's no harshness in the upper mids. And I will say that I switched to the foams mainly because I like to listen to these at a slightly higher volume than like normal people do. So with the flanges being just slightly closer to your eardrum, I thought it was just a little more raw around the edges. So I switched to the foam simply because they let me listen to it a little louder. I think just absorbing a tiny bit of energy up at that top of the sound, I think worked for me. So there's no harshness, but do pay attention to what's happening with your volume and try other tips to see if you're going to get a better, more pleasing sound for you, especially at that end. So the other interesting thing about the mids, and people talk about the blonde BL03 mids, how rich they are, how thick they are. It's a very full sounding vocal. And then on the ER4XR, you end up with this lighter BA sound. The bass is detached. So I sort of split these between the bass adding body or has body. The BL03 with this thick sound has a lot of body to it. The bass is bleeding right in there. It's quite a thick sound. Whereas the ER4XR, it pretty much adds body. It's very much a complement to the mids. But there's a wall between the two, so they don't really mix, but it's very satisfying and it's a very nice complement to the mids. So it's a hard description or a hard concept to describe, but think about the bass is quite detached from the mids, and but is the note weight any lighter? It's much lighter than the BL03, but there's still a lot of body to it because it's still there, but it's not necessarily all combined into one thick sound. So another cool song, Congregation by Low. That vocal resolution, it's also quite high. So in your upper right, you're going to hear this very close, intimate, detailed, high resolution voice. The staging is really nice. It's a great little tune if you haven't listened to it. And then acoustic pop cover, Sugar by Francesco Yates. I like both, this version, Robin Schulz's original song. But there's his voice in particular on this one. It sounds really real and uncompressed and dynamic. And that's another thing that you run across in budget sets is there's almost a compression to the voice. And what the ER4XR really brings to your ear is this, what does a voice sound like in this uncompressed sound? It's almost like going back to the original MP3s and checking different bit rates. On one it sounded kind of tinny and compressed, and then as you added more bit rate, it sounded better. So the ER4XR sort of reminds you of what that original uncompressed, very high dynamic range voice should actually sound like. So that treble resolution, high resolution, again, speed and accuracy. And I will say that cymbals are polite. They're not as much energy as I was expecting. And again, this goes back to why this is the Intermezzo, why it's a reference, because the CCA CS16 I was sort of blown away by how much energy was in the cymbals. They sort of seemed a little out of place. They popped up a little bit too much, lots of energy. So to have these, I was actually expecting them to be have a little more energy. I wouldn't call them flat, but they are polite is what I would say. I was expecting a little more pop on the cymbals, but it's probably more realistic than what I was expecting. So I think in generally, I would say the strings rise. They don't necessarily soar, especially if you're like me and you like a nice strong V-shaped signature where your treble is actually boosted quite a bit and strings tend to soar. These, I would say, they rise, and I think I've seen them called linear. So don't expect them to really pop, but they sound good. So again, another really hard concept to describe, but so heavy metal side, any of you Iron Maiden fans, Number of the Beast, those guitars, the drums, the cymbals, his vocals are actually really clear. This is the 2015 remaster of that song. Sounds really, really good. But if you go back to Peace of Mind, which was, I think, also remastered in 2015, The Trooper and Flight of Icarus, I think those recordings actually sound better, going back to this revealing concept of the ER4XR. The better your recording, the better it sounds, and I'll say that The Trooper sounds better than Number of the Beast, but I like Number of the Beast better, so that's why it's in there. If you want a little more bass, I like to have heavier drums, especially on old heavy metal like that. So you can EQ up the sub bass just a little bit. I mean, you could drag it up a lot of it, but you don't get a ton of increase back by EQing, but you do get a little bit of increase. And just sort of a reminder of, I read this little fact going back to Etymotic's, research origins. This was a driver that was derived out of a need to reproduce sounds out to 16 kilohertz. So when you talk about treble resolution, I think, or extension, I think these kind of go pretty far out there. And that was just kind of a tidbit that I ran across. I didn't verify it, but it was just something I read. So something worth mentioning for those of you folks who like that high extension on the treble as well. So the staging is sort of the mixed bag, the only mixed bag, of the whole set. And it's either in your head or it's extended quite a bit, or it goes out pretty wide. It's really strange. And I'll say sometimes I have absolutely no problems with it. It sounds beyond your ears and it sounds great. And sometimes it can sound quite in your ear. So, a bit of a toss-up. I wouldn't say it's bad in any case. It's just be aware that it's not going to be super wide. And some of that will maybe the tips. But try different tips. You can go that route. But generally, there's very nice height on the vocals, and it doesn't feel cramped until it does. So do play with the tips and play with the stage and the positioning in your ears, and all those things sort of affect how your ear perceives the staging. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.